Most people believe they understand supply and demand. They've heard the terms. They've seen charts move up and down. They think markets are simple systems where prices rise, supply increases, and everything balances out. But supply and demand don't really make sense until you watch them collide in real time. Right now, something important is happening in the silver market, and it's not just about price. It's about how economics, technology, and global policy are quietly coming together in a way that most people are not paying attention to. Silver is trading around $79 per ounce. That sounds high. It sounds meaningful, but by itself, that number tells you very little. The real story isn't the price you see on the screen. The real story is why the price is here, and what the forces underneath suggest about what may happen next. When I started looking deeply into silver, one thing stood out immediately. The modern global economy depends on silver more today than at any other time in history. And yet, most people still think of silver as something old-fashioned. Jewelry, coins, something stored away, not something powering the modern world. That idea is outdated. If silver were suddenly removed from the global supply chain today, many industries wouldn't slow down gradually. They would stop, not next year, not after adjustments, immediately. Think about that carefully. Every solar panel being installed anywhere in the world depends on silver because of its electrical properties. There is no other material that can replace silver at the same scale, with the same performance, and at a reasonable cost. Electric vehicles are another key example. Governments around the world are pushing EV adoption through incentives, regulations, and long-term policy goals. Every electric vehicle relies on silver for its electrical systems. On average, an EV contains between 25 and 50 grams of silver. That doesn't sound like much until you multiply it. Global EV production is close to 20 million vehicles per year. That means hundreds of metric tons of silver are needed every single year just for electric vehicles. And here's what makes that even more important. This demand barely existed 15 years ago. Silver demand didn't grow slowly over centuries. It expanded very quickly in a short period of time, and EVs are only one part of the story. Medical devices rely on silver for its antibacterial properties. Data centers use silver in servers and networking equipment. Semiconductor manufacturing depends on silver. Water purification systems require silver. These are not optional uses. These are essential systems that modern life depends on. Silver isn't used in these applications because it's convenient. It's used because, in many cases, there is no practical substitute that works as well at large scale. This leads to a critical realization. This story is not about silver being the best material. It's about silver being the only material that can meet modern technological demands at scale. So now we need to ask the next question: where does all this silver actually come from? Because this is where the story becomes much more complicated. Global silver production is around 25,000 metric tons per year. While many countries produce silver, most of the supply comes from just a few. Mexico leads production, followed by China, Peru, Chile, and Australia. Together, they account for roughly 60% of global output. Here's something most people don't realize. About 70% of silver production does not come from silver mines. It comes as a byproduct of mining other metals, mainly copper, lead, and zinc. This creates a very unusual situation. If copper prices fall and copper mines reduce production, silver supply also falls, even if silver prices are rising. Mining companies can't simply increase silver output, because silver is not their main business. They are copper miners first, silver comes second. This makes silver supply very different from many other commodities. Even when prices rise, supply cannot respond quickly. And that imbalance between fast-growing demand and slow-moving supply sets the stage for everything else we're about to discuss. At this point, we already have a clear picture. Demand for silver is rising quickly across industries that governments actively support. Supply is slow to respond because most silver is produced as a byproduct. New mines take many years to come online. That alone would make silver a sensitive market. But now, government policy enters the story. And this is where the balance begins to shift. Recently, China's Ministry of Commerce released a regulatory framework that didn't attract much attention at first. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a ban. There were no emergency headlines, but the details matter. The framework introduces new rules for managing silver exports over the coming years. Under these rules, silver producers must meet specific requirements and receive government approval in order to export the metal. There is also an annual production threshold that companies must meet to qualify. To understand why this matters, we need to understand China's role in the silver market. China is the world's third-largest producer of silver, producing roughly 3,500 metric tons per year. China is also the world's largest consumer of silver. They manufacture most of the world's solar panels. They have the largest electric vehicle market. Their electronics and manufacturing sectors are massive. For many years, China produced enough silver to meet domestic needs while also exporting large amounts to the rest of the world. This new framework does not stop exports, but it does give Beijing direct control over how much silver leaves the country, who exports it, and under what conditions. From China's point of view, this is logical. If you are planning major expansion in solar energy, electric vehicles, and advanced manufacturing, and you produce a critical material at home, you want to make sure domestic demand is protected first. Many countries do this with strategic resources. What makes this situation important for global markets is timing. This policy change is happening at a moment when physical silver markets are already tight. China produces about 14% of global silver supply. That is not dominant, but it is large enough that changes in export behavior can influence global availability. For manufacturers outside China who rely on Chinese silver, this introduces uncertainty. Will supply remain reliable? Will contract terms change? Will prices adjust? For commodity traders, assumptions about future supply flows now need to be updated. For industrial companies, this kind of policy change can lead to a simple decision: build inventory buffers just in case. This is how markets adjust, not with panic, not with collapse, but with many small, cautious decisions happening at the same time. And those decisions add up. What makes this moment especially interesting is that this policy change is not happening in isolation. It's happening while demand is growing and supply is already constrained. Now let's look at what the physical market itself is showing us. One of the key indicators of available silver is inventory held in major vaults, especially in London. These vaults support a wide range of industrial contracts and financial products. Recent data shows that London vaults hold roughly 28,000 metric tons of silver. That sounds like a lot, until you break it down. A large portion of that silver is held by investment products. One of the largest is the A-shares Silver Trust, which holds hundreds of millions of ounces of metal. When silver is locked into funds, institutional accounts, or long-term contracts, it is not freely available to meet new demand. This means the amount of silver that can be quickly delivered at current prices is much smaller than headline inventory numbers suggest. This doesn't mean the world is running out of silver. It means availability is becoming more concentrated. And when availability tightens, markets become more sensitive to changes in behavior. This is where futures markets give us another important signal. In futures trading, most contracts are usually settled in cash. Traders are typically focused on price exposure, not taking delivery of metal. But recently, more contracts have been standing for physical delivery instead of cash settlement. That tells us something important. Some participants don't just want price exposure. They want silver in hand. There are several possible reasons. Industrial buyers may be securing supply ahead of production needs. Some investors may be increasing physical holdings. Others may simply want certainty in a tightening market. Whatever the reason, increased delivery requests put pressure on warehouses and dealers who must supply real metal. That pressure matters. And it brings us closer to the question of price and momentum, and why markets can move quickly even without dramatic news. At this stage, something important starts to happen in markets. Fundamentals meet behavior. Supply is tight. Demand is growing. Policy has added uncertainty. Now people begin to act differently. One way to see this shift is through momentum indicators. A commonly used one is the Relative Strength Index, or RSI. It measures how strong recent price moves have been. Recently, silver's RSI has been sitting at very high levels. Under normal conditions, readings above 70 suggest a market may be overbought and due for a pullback. Readings above 80 are less common and usually signal very strong momentum. What's important here is not the number itself, it's what it represents. Strong momentum means there is consistent buying pressure. And that pressure doesn't come from one group alone. It comes from multiple types of participants acting for different reasons. Another interesting signal is silver's performance compared to gold. Gold and silver often move together as precious metals. But recently, silver has been outperforming gold. That tells us this move is not only about fear, inflation, or safe haven demand. Something specific to silver is driving interest. Industrial demand, supply concerns, and changes in physical market behavior are playing a larger role than macro headlines. Now, let's talk about industrial buyers, because their behavior matters more than most people realize. For manufacturers, price is important, but it's not the most important factor. Reliability of supply matters more. If you are running a solar panel factory, an EV production line, or a data center build-out, you don't just need silver to be cheap. You need it to be available when you need it. When supply feels uncertain, behavior changes. Companies may increase inventory levels beyond what they normally hold. They may sign longer-term contracts, even at higher prices, to lock in supply. They may work with multiple suppliers instead of relying on one source. Each of these actions makes sense on its own, but together, they create feedback loops. When some companies build inventories, less silver is available for others. That encourages more buyers to secure supply early. When long-term contracts are signed, future supply is locked up, making spot markets tighter. This is how markets tighten without a visible shortage. Not because silver disappears, but because available silver becomes harder to access. The solar industry feels this pressure clearly. Governments have set aggressive renewable energy targets. Companies have invested heavily in factories and projects. Installation pipelines are full. All of that depends on reliable access to silver at prices that allow projects to remain profitable. If silver prices rise sharply, some projects may become less attractive. Margins can shrink. Smaller players may struggle. The industry has reduced silver use per panel over time, but there are physical limits. At some point, performance suffers. Electric vehicle manufacturers face similar constraints. The auto industry operates on thin margins and complex supply chains. EV production is being pushed by regulation and incentives, and companies have invested billions in new models and facilities. Silver is not a large cost per vehicle, but it is essential. Without it, electrical systems cannot be completed, and vehicles cannot be delivered. For industries producing millions of units, even small changes multiplied across volume matter. Data centers and AI infrastructure add another layer. The expansion of cloud computing and artificial intelligence requires massive hardware investment. Servers, networking equipment, and power systems all rely on silver for reliable electrical performance. Large technology companies are spending enormous amounts on infrastructure. Silver may be a small part of the budget, but it must be available on schedule. Now let's shift perspective again. Investors and funds are responding to these conditions in different ways. Some have benefited from rising prices and may take profits. Others see current conditions as justification for staying invested or increasing exposure. Individual investors face similar choices. Someone who bought silver at much lower prices may be sitting on strong gains. The question becomes whether to lock those gains in or remain exposed. There is no single correct answer. Physical silver holders face different trade-offs than those using financial products. Physical metal reduces counterparty risk but brings storage and liquidity challenges. Exchange-traded products offer convenience but rely on market structures that work best under normal conditions. Mining stocks offer leverage to price moves, but they also come with operational and political risks. Each option has strengths and weaknesses. What matters most is understanding why the market is behaving the way it is and recognizing that behavior can reinforce itself. Which brings us to the final question. If prices stay high, how quickly can supply actually respond? To understand where the silver market may go from here, we need to focus on one final idea. It's called supply elasticity. That sounds technical, but the question behind it is simple. How quickly can supply increase when prices rise? For some commodities, supply responds fairly quickly. In agriculture, higher prices encourage farmers to plant more crops the next season. Supply can increase within months. For industrial metals like copper, mining companies can sometimes expand existing operations or restart idle capacity. That process takes longer, but it can happen within a few years. Silver is different. Because most silver is produced as a byproduct of other metals, supply depends on the economics of copper, lead, and zinc, not silver itself. If copper prices fall, a mining company may reduce output even if silver prices are rising. That's because copper determines whether the operation is profitable overall. Primary silver mines do respond to higher prices, but developing new silver projects takes a long time. New deposits must be found, studied, permitted, financed, and built. This process often takes 10 years or more. So even with silver prices much higher than they were just a few years ago, supply response will be slow. Measured in years, not months. At the same time, demand continues to grow. Solar installation targets keep rising as countries push toward renewable energy goals. Electric vehicle sales continue to increase as technology improves and costs fall. Data center and AI infrastructure construction continues to accelerate. These are not short-term trends that disappear easily. They are long-term shifts driven by technology and policy. That's why the current situation is not a quick squeeze that resolves overnight. It's a gradual adjustment as the market tries to balance structural demand with constrained supply growth. Trade policy adds more uncertainty. The United States has been reviewing its reliance on imported critical minerals, including silver. If tariffs or restrictions are introduced, global metal flows could change. American industrial users could face higher costs. Metal held in international vaults could become harder to access. Markets could become more regional instead of fully global. China's recent policy move could also influence other producing countries. If more nations decide to manage silver exports more actively, global market liquidity could decline. This doesn't automatically create shortages, but it can increase volatility and make prices more sensitive to small changes. Macroeconomic factors still matter as well. Silver prices are influenced by currency movements and interest rates. A weaker US dollar tends to support commodity prices. Lower real interest rates make non-yielding assets like silver more attractive compared to bonds. Expectations around inflation, central bank policy, and economic growth all interact with physical supply and demand. Some people describe rapid price increases as a bubble. That word gets used often when prices rise quickly. Driven mostly by speculation and emotion, is silver at current levels a bubble? That depends on how you look at the evidence. If industrial demand continues to grow, supply remains constrained, and policy tightens markets further, current prices may appear reasonable. If demand growth slows, new supply appears faster than expected, or policy impacts are overstated, prices may look high. What we can say with confidence is this: recent price moves are supported by real, observable factors, higher industrial use, documented policy changes, and measurable inventory behavior. That doesn't mean prices won't fall. Markets overshoot in both directions. But this is not a market driven purely by hype. Volatility is likely to remain high. When momentum is strong and positioning is concentrated, even small pieces of news can move prices sharply. A weaker demand report could trigger profit-taking. A supply disruption or policy shift could accelerate buying. For investors, traders, and industrial users, understanding these forces matters more than predicting exact price levels. Price alone tells you very little. Price combined with knowledge of supply chains, industrial needs, policy direction, and market structure provides real context. Before we close, it's worth stepping back. Markets are not machines. They are complex systems shaped by millions of decisions made by miners, manufacturers, traders, investors, and policymakers. When those decisions change, prices adjust. Right now, that adjustment is still underway. It may take time to fully play out. But understanding what's driving it helps explain why silver prices behave the way they do. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the silver market. If you found this analysis useful, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Support helps thoughtful, long-form content like this continue, content focused on understanding markets, not chasing noise. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the economic and market forces that shape the world around us.